Today I'm going to talk about the evolution of the human-dog relationship over the last 50 years. And I'm going to start with the United States, which is the country where I've been tracking the data for the longest. So this is a basic structure of the talk: introductory comments, trends in the USA, global dog numbers, longer-term data sets, only 2 that I can find, and conclusions. So as I said, I first started tracking pet populations in the 1980s. I was working at the Humane Society of the United States at the time, and the head of companion animals said, how can we track intake into shelters in the United States? And so we talked a bit about that, and then I left and went to Tufts, where we set up the Center for Animals and Public Policy, and one of our key programs was sheltering operations in the United States and dog population or pet population demographics. So I've been tracking demographics for a long time, and I have to say that for the most part the demographics are not very good, even in a place like America. And I have been pushing the importance of data collection for a long time and the importance of data analysis. I have to say that I feel that I've had very limited impact, although being at this conference today, I'm much encouraged because I just hear about the data collection going on in multiple communities around the world. So it's really very encouraging. So why is data collection and analysis essential? Well, you have to establish the scope of the issue and then make some estimates about the costs of any intervention. So, you know, how much will it cost me to do this? And then, you know, you have to look to measure the outcomes and determine levels of success. If you don't have that baseline data, you can go out and sterilize 1,000 dogs. Well, so what does that mean? Sterilize 1,000 dogs. What's the importance of that? So you need that first baseline data set, and then you can start measuring and tracking your progress. And then the data is really important to persuade municipal and government entities to support successful projects. So if you have success, you need the data to go in and support this. I have to tell you a story about my first encounter with the Bombay Municipal Council. So the manager of the Bombay Municipal Council, and it's called the Bombay Municipal Council still, even though it's Mumbai now, was this man I was brought into the thing, and we started talking about dogs. And he took out a filofax about this thick. And it was a little book like this, lots of loose pages in it. And he carefully opened it up, and he says, well, we have 90,000 street dogs in Mumbai. And at the time, I said, that's nonsense. And then Eli Hibby's father went and did the survey, and it was 78,000 street dogs. So it was, in fact, pretty close. So, but I was really struck. He had all of the municipal data sets in this filofax. So he understood the importance of data, and that's why you need data to basically get the people the municipality to sign on to what you suggest is great. Okay, in the United States. So in the USA, about 25% of the dogs in 1960s were estimated to be homeless street dogs, strays. And this is Bob Schneider at the UC Davis, who was doing some surveys in California, and he came up with this estimate. These street dogs have mostly disappeared today. You still have a few in inner cities, you still have some in Native American reservations, but in the rest of the country, there aren't any street dogs. And the shelter euthanasia of unwanted dogs has dropped from around 35 to 40 per 1,000 people in 1973 to around 2 in 2018. So there's been a huge decline in this unwanted dog population. In fact, today, I suspect that we're reaching the point at which people can't get puppies. They can't find the puppies they want. And so the demand is now beginning to rise, the supply is not in place, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. These are trends for New York City. So New York City was the home of the American SPCA. They were established in 1868. And they had records of the dog intake or the dog and cat intake into their shelter since 1894 up to 1994 when they gave up the animal control program in New York City, and it was then taken over by a municipal authority. And this is a chart of the intake of dogs per 1,000 people. So we do it per 1,000 because you have to standardize the numbers, because the population in New York City has gone from 2 million to 8 million in that period of time. But you can see that from 1890 to 1975, there have been changes, but no discernible trend. It's basically been pretty flat at about 10 dogs per 1,000 people going into the shelters. And then in 1975, you see this huge decline occurring. And this decline you can see in shelters around America that have records going back that far, and there are not many of them. You can see the same huge decline occurring in the 1980s. And in New York City, it went down to about 1 to 2 dogs per 1,000 people now coming into the shelter. So it's this is an evidence of a major human-dog behavior change in the country. And it happened around 1974, which is when there was this huge, so in 1973 there was a number of newspaper editorials and even an editorial in Science magazine, one of the premier scientific publications in the world today, commenting on the fact that there were too many dogs and cats going into shelters. And the man who invented the birth control pill, he and his colleagues wrote a paper in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, I'm not sure why it was there, but on the overpopulation of dogs and cats. And obviously he was interested in this because he was interested in birth control in humans, and so birth control in animals was part of his brief. He worked for a major pharmaceutical company, and I suspected they thought there would be money in it for the pharmaceutical company. But so there was all of this attention being paid to the number of dogs and cats. And I suspect what was happening was that in the 60s, suddenly you had this flood of dogs and cats coming into shelters. And by 1973, it was a crisis. People just said, we're overwhelmed, too many dogs and cats. We're euthanizing 80, 90% of the animals that come into the shelters. We've got to stop it. So there were 2 major conferences in 74 and 76. And they launched legislation, education, and sterilization in that year, at that time. AVMA, American Animal Hospital Association, American Kennel Club, HSUS, ASPCA, all the major stakeholders participated. And you began to see a big change in the euthanasia rate. And so here you have, on the right-hand side, a chart. This chart here, you can see, this is dogs and cats. So it was about 63 dogs and cats per 1,000 people were being euthanized in 1973 in American shelters. And today we're down to around about 2, 3, 4 dogs and cats per 1,000 people being euthanized in American shelters. This shows, this chart here shows more recent data from 2010 to 2016, and specifically just dogs. And you can see the euthanasia of dogs has dropped to about 500,000. So there's been a big, big change in the human-dog population situation. One of the other things that I think I'm really intrigued in is the importance of this for the veterinary profession. So the USA is a developed country. We've got about 18 veterinarians per 100,000 people. And, but some of what they're actually doing has changed. So you can see that in 1965 or 66, about 50% of the practicing veterinarians were small animal practitioners. Today, it's about 75%. So there's been this big increase in the US veterinary profession in small animal practitioners. And that's because there are more pets, there's more demand for veterinary care for those pets, the attachment of people to their animals has increased, and so the income for veterinary profession has gone up. Big issue, I think, for the veterinary profession across the globe is this: the attachment to pets drives a major change in what veterinary profession actually does. And then this right-hand chart is a chart from the AVMA does surveys of pet populations every 5 years. And so we start in 1986 and look at just this orange line here. That's the line that identifies what proportion of the pet population, in this case pet dogs, are under 1 year of age at the end of the year that the survey was done. So in 1986, 20% of the dogs in homes in America were under 1 year of age. In 2016, only 10% were under 1 year of age. So I'm not really sure what this means in terms of the sort of pet demographics and all the rest of it, but it's a big change that, you know, in 1986, 11 million puppies were entering homes. In 2016, 6.5 million puppies were entering homes in America. So something that we have to sort of factor into our general thinking about what's going on here. Okay, leaving America behind. We talk about, well, actually, I'm not leaving America behind. We're starting with America. And so, again, this is AVMA statistics from 2016, the map. This map here shows the number of dogs per 1,000 people in different states. And you can see that there are not many dogs per 1,000 people up in the New England states or in Illinois, and there are lots more dogs per 1,000 people in other parts of the country. It's about a threefold difference from low to high. Have no idea why that is so. And this shows you 4 official surveys of pet populations in America. And they vary from 68% of households having pets to 49% of households having pets. Now, these are official surveys, and that's a pretty big difference from one survey to another. This one is the American Pet Products Association. It's a pet products manufacturers group, and they have an interest in having more pets in households, obviously, an economic interest, and they have the highest proportion of pets. I think it's wrong. I think that the AVMA is closer to the truth, but I think even the AVMA is a little too high, and that we're now, instead of 56% of households, we're probably talking about 52% of households. But I have no data to support that. This lowest one here is the US Census number. They've done 2 surveys of pet populations in about 20 metro areas in America. So these are urban areas, and urban areas have lower pet populations. So that's why that number is lower. In terms of globally, you see that the population of dogs in different parts of the world varies from 300 per 1,000 to about 50 per 1,000 or less. And these are regional numbers. The average for the globe is about 100, which is that 10 per 100 dogs that people have been sort of talking about ever since Alex Wanderler started focusing on dog populations and rabies. So there's been a huge change in, there's a huge difference between one part of the world and another. Obviously, Middle East and North Africa, mostly Islamic countries, have lower dog populations, but we don't know really why India has 300, or India has 100 dogs per 1,000, and the Philippines have 300 dogs per 1,000. No idea. Or why South America is up to 250 to 100. So roaming dog populations vary considerably from the developed world. You know, you've got the developed countries here, low roaming dog populations, developing countries, high roaming dog populations. And then if you look at just pet dogs, this is the range of pet dog populations. So we're not including roaming dogs in these numbers, but that's a fairly large range. And we're not paying any real attention to the differences between the different countries. Couple of specific examples. There have been there are very few studies that have gone on for longer than 10 years. One of them is in Jaipur, and they have fantastic data. And this chart here shows, and this number at this point here is a 1978 paper that was published by a couple of Indian scientists. And so I just stuck it in there to give some sense. But the green is the numbers of dogs per 1,000 people. So it takes into account that Jaipur's population has gone from 750,000 in 1976 to 3.5 million today. And you can see that since 1995, when Help in Suffering started their sterilization program, they estimate that the street dog population or the dog population in Jaipur has gone down dramatically. And this chart here from Lex Hibby's work and report shows the increase in sterilizations of the dog percentage sterilization numbers over the course of about 6-7 years. It's done by quarter, so 1 is quarter 1, 32 is at the end of year 8, and so and it stabilized at that 75% figure. They've never really got much higher than that since then. And then you look at the index counts, what Ellie was talking about in her workshop yesterday, you know, just running along the same stretch of road. In Jaipur, they didn't do the index counts at the same time to start with. They did them all over the place in terms of the time of the year. So I've separated their index counts into 2 lines. One is September to December, before the puppies are born, and the other is January to April, after the puppies are born. And you can see that after the puppies are born, there are more dogs on the street than before the puppies are born, which you would expect. And so there's been this big decline, about 50%, but as you can see in more recent surveys, the number's going up again. So I've talked to Dr. Sanjay Singh, who's here from Jaipur, and we need to sort of track this. What's happening here? Why is that number beginning to go up? Costa Rica is another country where I've been working since 1990, where I've been involved since 1999. And this is one shelter in Costa Rica. AHPPA stands for Association Humanitaria para Protección de los Animales. These are their numbers. And so I'm not really sort of particularly focused on that, except that this last chart, this last column, the number of animals euthanized by the shelter has dropped from about 1,300 to somewhere around 200. And the reason why it's gone up in some of these years is the government is now bringing rescued animals to from dog fights and hoarding situations to the shelter. And so there are some of these animals that are just too far gone to rehab and rehome. They do have a woman rehabbing fighting dogs, and they're able to rehome a lot of them, but not all of them. So that's one of the reasons why the numbers have gone up. And they're sterilizing about 20,000 dogs a year out of a estimated population in the country of somewhere between 1 to 1.2 million. So it's not enough to have a significant impact on the sterilization rate, but it does seem to have a significant impact on behavior. At least I think so. And these are 2 surveys done by WSPA when they were still WSPA in 2003 and 2011. And this, you talk about human behavior change. Look at this. Does your dog sleep inside at night? 26% in 2003, 54% in 2011. That's a huge human behavior change. If you talk to social scientists, a doubling, a 27% increase is just huge over just 8 years. And then you can see these other numbers show similar sorts of changes, similar directional changes in human behavior. And so why is this happening? I think what's happening in Costa Rica is the same thing that happened in America in the 1960s, is that people are becoming more engaged and more quote-unquote responsible owners. In the Costa Rican veterinary profession, tracking numbers, in Malaysia, I was told that the first small animal hospital opened in 1980, and then I was told in 2015 there were 300. And Natasha has just told me there are 500 small animal clinics in Malaysia today. So, I mean, this is, to my mind, probably one of the more significant metrics you can use to track this. In Jaipur, there was just the Help and Suffering Veterinary Hospital in 1995. There are now 5 additional quality clinics in Jaipur. So tracking the veterinary clinics, small animal veterinary clinics, I think is a huge way to go. And this is the registration of new veterinarians with the Colegio de Veterinarios in Costa Rica. And you can see that it was sort of bumping along at 10, 15, 20 per year, and then suddenly 90, 200 in 2015. So there's a huge increase. There are more veterinarians per 100,000 people in Costa Rica than there are in the United States, so I don't know what their business prospects are, but nonetheless, this I think is a really important thing. So WellBeing International, an organization that we started a year ago, just over a year ago, and a global dog campaign is one of our major sort of program foci. And so we're hoping to sort of become part of a sort of global network of organizations that have a fairly standardized way of data collection and data reporting, and start providing a software system where people can report data that will be open to everybody, so that we can actually start tracking what's happening around the world. And you'll have to sort of talk about dogs per thousand, you'll have to talk about how many you sterilize, you'll have to talk about percentage of sterilizations, and various other important metrics. But that's something that we're hoping to do. My estimate that international APOs are now spending $30 million a year on various dog welfare programs, and the rabies costs are $2 billion a year in direct costs. So you give us that $2 billion, we could solve rabies and we could solve the welfare problem without even $100 million would go a long way towards doing it. So this is what we're looking at, and I think that we're at a point now where we can start talking to groups around the world saying, okay, let's see how we can build a consortium that really empowers ICAM and sort of really empowers the dog population management, humane dog, and eliminates rabies. So talks with attendees here are very encouraging. Many interesting projects springing up around the world. This century, the body of academic literature has just exploded, so we have a lot more data on what's going on. The signs that human-dog interactions are becoming more harmonious, add your own definition of what that means, are everywhere. And very much looking forward to the 4th Humane Dog Management Program. Thank you very much.